Most people see a uniform and think it represents authority. They see a name tag and think it gives them the right to judge. But I've spent enough time on the road to know that a badge, whether it's silver or plastic, is often just a shield for a coward. There is a specific, gut-wrenching kind of evil that waits for a person to reach their sunset years just to try and steal their dignity. They look at a woman who has survived 8 decades of life's storms, and they don't see a matriarch. They see a target that can't run. They think that because her hands shake, she won't stand up for herself. But what these petty tyrants always forget is that some grandmothers are protected by a brotherhood that lives by a different set of laws. We don't care about your corporate policy or your loss prevention quotas. We care about respect. And if you put your hands on one of ours, you're going to find out that the Motor Mafia doesn't just ride, we settle accounts. Let me tell you about Mrs. Eleanor Vance. She's 81 years old, and she's the kind of woman who still remembers the name of every kid who ever played on her lawn. Her husband, Arthur, was a local firefighter, a man who ran into burning buildings for 40 years without blinking. Since he passed, Eleanor has carried on with a quiet, stubborn independence. She lives in a small brick cottage on the edge of town, where she grows prize, winning roses, and bakes bread for the church every Sunday. She's a woman of faith, a woman of integrity, and someone who would rather go hungry than take a single grain of rice that didn't belong to her. Every Thursday, she takes the bus to Harvest Market to pick up her small list of groceries. It's her routine, her way of staying connected to a world that seems to be moving faster every day. But this Thursday, the world didn't just move fast, it turned predatory. The manager's name was Sterling. He was a man in his early 30s with a buzz cut and a look of permanent irritation, like the world owed him a promotion he was never going to get. Sterling didn't like people, he liked metrics, he liked efficiency, and most of all, he liked the rush of catching someone in a mistake. He'd been watching the overhead cameras, and he saw Eleanor in the spice aisle. He saw her reach for a small tin of cinnamon, saw her check the price, and saw her slip a folded piece of paper, a list her granddaughter had written for her, into the side pocket of her coat. To any sane person, it was a woman checking her notes. To Sterling, it was concealment. He didn't approach her like a human being. He didn't ask her if she was finding everything okay. He waited until she was near the checkout, in front of a dozen other shoppers, and then he struck. He didn't just stop her, he lunged. He grabbed Eleanor by her upper arm, his fingers sinking into the soft wool of her coat and the fragile skin beneath it. "Nice try, lady," he barked, his voice loud enough to turn every head in the store. "I saw you stash the merchandise. I'm tired of you seniors thinking the rules don't apply to you just because you have gray hair." The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Eleanor gasped, her face flushing a deep, painful red. She tried to pull away, but Sterling's grip was like a trap. I don't understand, sir," she stammered, her voice thin and trembling. "I haven't taken anything. I was just checking my list." Sterling sneered, pulling her closer to his chest. "Tell it to the sheriff. You're coming to my office right now so I can search your pockets. And don't bother crying. I've heard it all before." He began to drag her toward the back of the store, ignoring her pleas and the shocked stares of the other customers. He wanted a public execution of her character. He wanted to feel like a big man. I was in the back of the store, near the dairy cases, with 40 of the brothers. We'd just finished a memorial run and were grabbing ice and water for the wake. I heard the commotion, but more importantly, I heard the fear in that woman's voice. It's a sound you never forget once you've heard it. I dropped the bag of ice and started walking. I didn't need to look back to know that the brothers were right there, a solid wall of black leather and cold intent. Sterling was so caught up in his power trip, so focused on the frail woman he was manhandling, that he didn't notice the atmosphere in the store change. He didn't notice the shoppers backing away in silence. He didn't notice the low, rhythmic thud, thud, thud of heavy boots hitting the floor in unison. He didn't see the light from the storefront being swallowed up by the presence of 40 men who don't believe in corporate policy when it comes to bullying. I reached him just as he was about to pull Eleanor through the swinging doors of his office. I didn't say a word at first. I just reached out and placed my hand over his, the one he had clamped onto Eleanor's arm. I squeezed, just enough to let him feel the difference between his strength and mine. "You're making a lot of noise, Sterling," I said, my voice a low, dangerous rumble that felt like an earthquake under his feet. "But I think you've got the wrong person, and I know for a fact you've got the wrong neighborhood. Because around here, Eleanor Vance is a queen, and you're just a man about to have a very, very bad day. If you've ever seen a bully hide behind a title to break a woman who spent 81 years being the heart of her community, hit that like button right now. Don't let these cowards think they can act in the shadows. Drop a QUEN in the comments if you're ready to see how the Motor Mafia conducts a performance review that Sterling will never forget." Sterling's eyes snapped to mine, and for a split second, I saw the gears turning in his head. He looked at my hand on his arm, then at my face, and finally at the sea of black leather filling the aisle behind me. The arrogance didn't vanish all at once. It curdled into a sickly, defensive sneer. He was the type of man who had spent his whole life relying on the fact that most people are too polite or too busy to intervene. He thought his manager's vest made him bulletproof. He didn't realize that to the Motor Mafia, that vest was just a neon sign pointing at a man who needed a lesson in gravity. "You're interfering with store business, pal." Sterling spat, though his voice had jumped up an octave. "I have her on camera. This is a legal matter. You and your friends need to back off before I call the cops." I didn't let go of his arm. If anything, I tightened my grip until I felt the bone beneath his sleeve start to protest. I looked at Eleanor. She was trembling so hard her glasses were sliding down the bridge of her nose. Her eyes were wide, darting between me and Sterling, caught in a nightmare she hadn't asked for. "Eleanor," I said, keeping my voice as steady as an idling engine, "did you take anything from this man's store?" "No, Jax," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I have my list. The cinnamon is in my basket. I haven't even gone to the register yet. He just grabbed me." I turned my gaze back to Sterling. The brothers had closed the circle now. Biggs was on his left, a mountain of a man with arms the size of Sterling's waist. Hammer was on his right, leaning against a display of canned goods with a look of pure, clinical boredom that was more terrifying than a scream. The store had gone graveyard quiet. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerators and the heavy, ragged breathing of a manager who was starting to realize he was standing on a very short pyre. "She says she didn't do it," Sterling, I said, leaning in until our foreheads were inches apart. And in this neighborhood, Eleanor's word is worth more than every camera in this building. Now, you're going to let go of her arm, very slowly. And then we're going to have a little conversation about customer service. Sterling's fingers uncurled one by one. The second Eleanor was free, Biggs stepped in, moving with a grace you wouldn't expect from a man his size. He gently placed a hand on Eleanor's shoulder and guided her toward a nearby bench. "You're okay, Miss Eleanor," Biggs said, his gravelly voice softening. "The boys are just going to help the manager with his paperwork." Now it was just us and Sterling. He tried to straighten his vest, trying to claw back some shred of the authority he'd just lost. "Look, maybe it was a misunderstanding, okay? She can go. Just take her and get out of my store. We're done here. Don't." Hammer laughed, and the sound was like stones grinding together in a bucket. "We haven't even started. See, Sterling, you didn't just misunderstand. You grabbed her. You bruised her. You tried to humiliate her in front of people she's known for 50 years. You created a debt. And out here on the road, we don't like unpaid debts." I looked at Sterling's chest, specifically at the manager, tag pinned to his lapel. "You like being the boss, don't you? You like having everyone follow your rules. Well, for the next 10 minutes, the Motor Mafia is the board of directors. And your first order of business is the intercom." Sterling looked at the public address system at the end of the aisle. His face went pale. "What? No. I'm not." I didn't wait for him to finish. I grabbed him by the back of his vest and walked him toward the counter. I didn't rush. And I didn't use more force than was necessary to keep him moving. But he knew he wasn't going anywhere else. The brothers followed in a silent, rhythmic formation, their boots hitting the floor in a steady thump, thump, thump that felt like a countdown. We reached the mic, and I clicked the talk button, handing the receiver to Sterling. "The whole store heard you call her a thief." I whispered into his ear. "Now, the whole store is going to hear the truth. And if you miss a single word of the apology I'm about to dictate, we're going to go back to your office and see how your cameras handle a system failure." Sterling's hands were shaking so much he could barely hold the plastic receiver. He looked at the shoppers standing in the aisles, watching him. He looked at Eleanor sitting on the bench, her head bowed in shame. He realized that the only way out of this was through the truth. If you think a man who uses his power to bully, the elderly deserves to be stripped of his pride in front of everyone he tried to impress, hit that like button right now. Don't let these corporate predators get away with it. Drop a DIGNI to Y in the comments if you want to hear exactly what Sterling said over those speakers. Because the Motor Mafia isn't just about the ride. It's about the reckoning. Sterling's knuckles were white as he gripped that plastic receiver. He looked at the brothers, then at the rows of shoppers who had stopped in their tracks, and finally at Eleanor, who was still trembling on that wooden bench. He wanted to run. I could see the muscles in his legs twitching, his mind frantically searching for a back door or a security guard that wasn't already paralyzed by the sight of 40 bikers. But there was nowhere to go. He was trapped in a cage of his own making, and the air was getting thinner by the second. "Speak," I commanded, my voice barely above a whisper but carrying the weight of a sledgehammer. He keyed the mic. A sharp, piercing feedback whine echoed through the store, making everyone flinch. Sterling swallowed hard, the sound of his dry throat clicking over the speakers for every customer to hear. "Attention, Harvest Market shoppers," he began, his voice thin and cracking like old parchment. "This is Sterling, the floor manager. I need to make a statement regarding the incident in the spice aisle." He paused, looking at me for a reprieve. I just tilted my head toward the mic. "Earlier today, I falsely accused Mrs. Eleanor Vance of shoplifting," he continued, the words sounding like they were being pulled out of him with pliers. "I acted without proof. I used unnecessary force. Mrs. Vance is a woman of the highest integrity, a pillar of this community, and I am deeply ashamed of the disrespect I showed her. She is not a thief. I was the one in the wrong." The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the linoleum. Eleanor looked up, her eyes watery, her chin beginning to lift, just a fraction. For the first time since he'd grabbed her, the shame wasn't on her face. It was exactly where it belonged on Sterling. "And?" I prompted, tapping the counter with my ring. Sterling's face turned a shade of purple I've only seen on a bruised plum. "And, as a gesture of our extreme regret, Mrs. Vance will never pay for a grocery item in this store again. Her account is covered, in full, indefinitely. Furthermore, I will be stepping down from my position effective immediately." I took the receiver from his shaking hand and clicked it off. The store remained silent for a heartbeat, and then a single shopper near the bakery started clapping. Then another. Within seconds, the produce section was filled with a sound that wasn't a roar of an engine, but the roar of a neighborhood standing up for one of its own. But we weren't done with the restitution. I looked at Sterling, who was staring at the floor, his manager tag hanging crookedly. "The apology was for them," I said, pointing to the crowd. "But the debt to Eleanor is still open. Biggs, bring the basket." Biggs walked over, carrying Eleanor's small wire basket. Inside were her roses, her flour, and that tiny tin of cinnamon that had started this whole nightmare. I pointed to the shelves. "Sterling, you're going to spend the next hour shopping for her. You're going to get the finest cuts of meat, the freshest produce, and every item on that list she was checking when you decided to be a predator. And then, you're going to carry those bags to the bus stop." He didn't argue. He spent the next 60 minutes under the watchful eyes of 40 brothers, filling cart after cart with the best the store had to offer. He looked like a broken man, but in every aisle he walked, he had to face the eyes of the people he'd tried to impress with his metrics. He was seeing the human cost of his ego. By the time we reached the sidewalk, Eleanor was sitting in the sidecar of my bike. We weren't letting her take the bus today. Sterling stood there, clutching 6 heavy paper bags, looking at the line of 40 motorcycles idling in the sun. The sound was deafening, a rhythmic, pulsing wall of noise that announced to the entire town that a queen was being escorted home. If you believe that a title doesn't give you the right to touch a woman who's spent 80 years building a life of honor, hit that like button right now. We showed Sterling that the Motor Mafia doesn't just settle scores, we protect the legacy of our streets. Drop a LEGACY in the comments if you want to see the final escort back to Eleanor's cottage. Because when we ride, nobody walks in fear. Sterling stood on the curb, the heavy bags of groceries straining his arms, looking at the line of 40 motorcycles that stretched down the block like a shimmering ribbon of steel. He looked at Eleanor, perched safely in my sidecar, her silver hair catching the afternoon light and a look of quiet, hard, earned peace on her face. The hum of the engines wasn't just noise anymore, it was a physical barrier between her and the man who had tried to break her spirit. Sterling looked like he wanted to disappear into the cracks of the sidewalk, but he had one last duty to perform. "Load 'em up, Sterling," I said over the low growl of my shovelhead. "Carefully. Those eggs cost more than your pride today." He stepped forward, his movement stiff and robotic, and began loading the bags into the support truck Biggs was driving. Every time he leaned over, he had to look at the Motor Mafia patches, the weathered leather, and the eyes of men who lived by a code he was only just beginning to understand. He didn't say a word, and neither did we. The lesson was in the silence. When the last bag was tucked away, I looked him dead in the eye one last time. "Tomorrow, Eleanor is going to walk into that store to get her morning paper," I said, my voice cutting through the rumble of the bikes. "And if the person behind that counter doesn't treat her like she's the owner of the building, I'm going to assume the site culture hasn't changed. And if the culture hasn't changed, Sterling, we'll be back for a follow-up meeting. Do you understand?" He nodded, a sharp, frantic motion. "I understand. It won't happen again. I'm done here." He turned and walked back toward the sliding glass doors. But he didn't look like the manager who had marched out an hour ago. He looked like a man who had finally realized that power without respect is just a hollow shell. I kicked my bike into gear, and with a single wave of my hand, the Brotherhood moved out. We didn't speed, we didn't show off. We rode in a perfect, tight formation, flanking Eleanor as we wound through the quiet streets toward her cottage. People came out onto their porches to watch us pass. A wall of black leather protecting a grandmother in a floral coat. It was a funeral procession for Eleanor's fear and a parade for her dignity. When we pulled up to her brick cottage, the smell of her prize, winning roses, was thick in the air. Hammer and Biggs carried the groceries inside, filling her pantry with enough supplies to last her through the winter. I stayed by the bike, helping Eleanor out of the sidecar. She took my hand, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so small. "Jax," she whispered, her eyes shining. "Arthur always said that the world was full of fires, and you just had to find the men brave enough to run toward them. I think he would have liked to ride with you boys today." He already did. "Miss Eleanor," I replied, nodding toward the firefighter's memorial sticker on the back of my helmet. "We don't forget the ones who stood for us. And we sure as hell don't let their families stand alone. We didn't stay long. We aren't the kind of men who hang around for a thank you. We're the kind of men who make sure the thank you is never necessary." As we rolled away, I looked back in the mirror. Eleanor was standing on her porch, her hand raised in a small, steady wave. She wasn't the shoplifter Sterling tried to make her. She was the heart of the block, and the heart was beating stronger than ever. People think the Motor Mafia is about the lawlessness of the road. They see the bikes, and they see trouble. But the truth is, we're the only law that matters when the world forgets its manners. We're the insurance policy for the people who don't have a voice. We're the shadow that follows the bully, and the shield that guards the saint. And as long as there's breath in my lungs and fuel in my tank, nobody, and I mean nobody, is going to disrespect the legacy of the people who built these streets. Respect isn't a corporate policy. It's a blood oath. And in this town, the Motor Mafia is the one who collects. this is Jax. Signing off.